D-Day has been called the most significant event of the 20th century. The world was at a crossroads. The Nazis controlled Europe. Their doctrine was racist. Their basis of power was hatred. Their manifest destiny to dominate the world was frighteningly real. Yet Hitler had them mired in a battle with Russia that depleted his power. To defeat him, the Allies needed to invade Western Europe and create a second front. The disaster at Dieppe taught the Allied planners several lessons that they would use in the planning of D-Day. They could not invade a fortified port, so landing beaches were sought. The beaches had to be able to support tanks and wide enough to allow several divisions to land within a very short period of time. The site also had to be close to England. That was necessary for an efficient supply route, as well as being within range for effective aerial support by fighter pilots. Most importantly, it had to be within striking distance of Germany's industrial heartland. One location met all of the criteria: the Calvados coast in Normandy. A massive training program commenced, as did Operation Fortitude, a cover plan designed to confuse Nazi intelligence. But Hitler was aware of the weakness along the Atlantic coast. He had the Atlantic Wall built in order to repel an invasion anywhere along the Western Front. 17.6 million cubic tons of concrete was poured, fortifying the coast with gun emplacements, pillboxes, and obstacles. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel oversaw the massive program and had the coastline covered with mines. Any landing would face fierce resistance. Operation Overlord called for the landing of American, British, and Canadian units on 5 codenamed beaches. The Canadian Air Force would play a key role. Bomber Command would destroy gun emplacements and strategic sites. Fighter Command would provide aerial cover and support. Canadian paratroopers would parachute into action for the very first time in their country's history, jumping behind the lines and aiding the British 6th Airborne in protecting the east flank. The Royal Canadian Navy would transport the infantry and armored units across the English Channel and land them on the beaches, as well as providing artillery support. The infantry and armored units would land on Juno Beach and charge the fortifications there. Their job was to break through the Atlantic Wall and take a foothold in Europe. And so it was on June the 6th, 1944, when Canada became one of 3 nations that would determine the course of history. It would be Canada's 24 hours of destiny.
D-Day, as you know, was the assault on Europe, or the opening of the Second Front.
We knew it was going to be a tough thing. To us, the Atlantic Wall, they kept saying Atlantic Wall, we had no idea what it looked like, and we sort of envisioned it to being pillboxes from one end of the France to the other, right through to Belgium.
You have to remember that we were young, irresponsible, slowly growing up, but not normal growing up. As we joined the Army as kids, 4 years later, we're at the beach.
Well, we were all excited, of course. We knew it was coming, and we were anxious to take part in it.
And we wondered whether it could be successful. But we had been bombing the communications, railways, and other centers more intensely in about a month prior to the invasion.
We trained and trained and trained, and into the boats and out of the boats and things like that.
And I think that's what most people felt, that we'd had enough training. Let's get going on whatever task we had to do and get it done.
Because I guess a lot of people's minds, for the first time in 4 years or so, you could see hope of the thing ending and you getting back home.
Shall we say we were wound up? We were going to win the war all by ourselves. Didn't think anything could stop us.
As June the 6th started, Canadian bombers were pounding the coastal defenses. The Navy was crossing the Channel. and the paratroopers were about to jump.
I noticed on the flight over from England, I looked down through the clouds, and halfway across the English Channel, there was so many boats from halfway across back to England that it seemed or appeared to me that you could almost jump from one ship to another and go back to the English coast. And it would give you a great feeling that everybody was working for the same purpose.
Of course, the Navy part of that was called, on June the 6th, was called Operation Neptune, while the broad code name was Overlord, Operation Overlord.
But that was the biggest armada that went across on D-Day that there has ever been.
We weren't told where we were going, or we didn't know until we got there. Or
we were following a channel that had been swept by the minesweeping flotilla.
And the waves were quite rough. But as you got further out in the channel, it got really rough.
I was told the seaman that I wasn't a very good sailor, and that's why I joined the Army. So they said, well, why don't you lie on the gunwale? I was on an LST, a landing craft tank. And why don't you lay on the gunwale and look for mines?
We were walling because these smaller boats, the landing craft, weren't that big, and they just went every which direction. Right to left, up and down. It was pretty hard to keep anything in on an even keel.
Well, everybody was sick.
Once a few started getting sick, everybody got sick, it seemed. In fact, we were issued with what they called vomit bags vomit, and I think we were 3, I think each we had. Well, most of us could have used at least 12.
It was windy and rough day. Started out anyways, and about halfway I got seasick, and pardon me, but I had a glass of rum that fixed me up.
Our platoon commander was Benny Dunkerman, and his batman was on our craft, and he had to run to the side and let it go over the side, puked, and he lost all his false teeth and everything there.
I think we were all awake. Nobody could sleep.
I think we were just wishing that we would land and get off of the damn boat to get away from the seasickness.
Bomber Command, whenever they could, would go out and soften up the German army that had previously been dug into a certain location and permitted our Canadian troops to proceed ahead. When you put the Lancasters and the Halifaxes together, carrying something like 10 and 12,000 pounds of bombs each, it's a total destruction of almost whatever they went after.
We went in to bomb the heavy guns on the French shore. 2208 we took off in Lancaster KB-726A. Flying Officer DeBrain was the pilot. And our operation was against the coastal defense. I'm not French, but Crutances or something like that.
Death was all around us, you might say, especially when we were on the bombing run. There's a common theme that said 1 in 4, or maybe a quarter of all air crews would not come back.
And I didn't notice anything different than any other type of operation, because there's always shooting going on.
At some time or other, fear does hit you. There's no question.
We bombed the guns on the shore, on the beaches that night. Well, that was just another target.
We were all very happy. Okay, let's go. Let's support the fellows on the ground.
So it was a tremendous job of coordination and cooperation and so on.
Most of us went out about 12:10. We were a little earlier than anticipated. I think we were supposed to go in at 12:30, and the rest of the battalion was to be in at 1 o'clock, and it'd be continuous from then on. The whole division would be dropping in different fields.
I was a private with the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion, having dropped into Normandy at about 12:45, that's 1:45 on the morning of June the 6th.
In my case, as far as I can remember, we were deplaned about 12:50, 10 minutes to 1 in the morning.
I was in the medical section of the battalion, so I was in headquarters company, and I'm not quite sure, but I think we left around midnight, our particular plane.
My company and my situation where we went in these Albemarle bombers, and only 10 men could go in each aircraft. The first 120 in our company went over in the Albemarle bombers. All the rest came out of the Dakotas, the American C-47, which 20 men sticks, and they could go out the door, which was faster.
There wasn't very much talk, to be truthful. Everyone was apprehensive and nervous, of course, and there wasn't a lot of chatter going on, no.
This picture changed when we neared the coast, and we could see flashes of light through the porthole.
Once we reached the coastline, there was some Mac fire, and the aircraft did take evasive action. And possibly this accounts for why we were so wide scattered.
Some that went straight into the target, to the drop zone, at least they got onto the field. Others who got the evasive action, the pilots lost where they were supposed to be, and when they saw a field that they thought looked familiar, they just put on the green light and everybody go out.
None of us hit the actual drop zone.
But the aircraft, the pilot was weaving all over the place, and we were rolling around inside and cursing because he wasn't flying in a straight path. And anyway, the red light came on, and so the guys that were closest to the hole unhooked the door, raised them up and hooked them on the sides of the aircraft so the hole was ready. After the first 4 men went out, and they went out, they were going zip when the green light went on. I don't know whether it was the next man who was a Bren gunner or what, but somebody said the door is flopped, and he got jammed in the half of the hole. They struggled, and finally he disappeared, and they hooked the door back up, and the rest of us went out. But what had happened at the time that elapsed, the last of us were dropped way the heck off where we were supposed to be. Nobody believes that one stick landed close to where the troops were going to come up on the beach later on. And one was at an airfield at Le Havre, that's almost 40 miles between.
In my case, it was just fields. That's all I seen were fields. There was no fire actually at all in the area where I was.
And then the Germans had flooded the area around the Dives River. Those who landed in the fields that were flooded, there was only 3 feet of water. They survived.